Businessman fakes bankruptcy to test his fiancée, but the housekeeper proves her true love. Margaret Wilson knew that day would change everything when she saw her boss gathered with men in suits in the living room, nervous gestures and papers scattered on the mahogany table. 15 years working as a housekeeper in that Beverly Hills mansion had taught her to recognize the signs of a storm before it even arrived. It was when Richard Harrison raised his voice and spoke the words that would echo through the halls like thunder. The company was bankrupt, and he would lose everything. Margaret let the crystal tray slip from her hands, the sound of shards echoing through the silent room. "Margaret, please, could you give us some privacy?" asked Richard, his voice heavy with a sadness she had never witnessed in all those years. She nodded and left the room, but stayed outside the door, her heart pounding in her chest. Through the wood, she could hear fragments of the conversation that confirmed her worst fears. The construction company Harrison and Associates, the empire built by Richard's late father, had been in the red for months. When the men left, Margaret returned to the room to pick up the pieces. Richard remained seated in the leather armchair, looking out the window at the garden she herself tended with such care. At 42, he still maintained the elegant posture that had always characterized him, but there was something different in his brown eyes. 15 years, Margaret," he murmured without turning. 15 years building all this. And now, Mr. Richard, what will happen to the house?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. He turned to face her. Margaret could see the wrinkles that had deepened around his eyes in recent months, signs of a pressure she didn't know existed. "I'll have to sell everything. The house, the furniture, the cars, and you, the staff." He made a painful pause. "I'll have to let all of you go. I can't afford to pay the salaries." Margaret's world crumbled at that moment, not just because of the loss of her job, but because of the pain etched on the face of the man she had learned to respect and, secretly, to love all those years. Richard had always been a fair employer who paid on time, offered health insurance, and had even saved her mother years ago when she needed an expensive surgery. "And Miss Brittany?" she asked, referring to Richard's fiancée. The silence that followed was more eloquent than any answer. That same day, the news spread through the house like wildfire. Betty, the cook, was the first to receive the phone call from Brittany Miller, cancelling all the wedding preparations. The 28-year-old, blonde and stunning, had met Richard at a charity gala 2 years before and quickly won his heart after the end of his previous marriage. "She said she needs to think," Betty told Margaret as they put away the dishes. "Think about what, for heaven's sake? The man is going through hard times and she abandons him?" Margaret didn't answer, but her heart ached for Richard. During dinner, served on one of the few nights he ate at home that week, she noticed how he checked his phone constantly, waiting for a call that never came. It was the movers who arrived on Monday morning, starting to catalogue the furniture and valuables. Margaret guided them through the rooms, each piece being tagged and appraised as if memories were being torn from the walls. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. It was then that she made the decision that would change both their lives forever. She looked for Richard in the office, where he was signing papers with the company's accountant, Mr. "Richard, may I speak with you?" He lifted his tired eyes to her. "Of course, Margaret." She took a deep breath and spoke the words that had been maturing in her heart since the day before. "I'm not leaving." "What do you mean?" "You've given me work for 15 years. You paid for my mother's surgery when she needed it. You never treated me poorly, always respected my family. Now it's my turn to repay you." Richard stood up, confused. "Margaret, I can't pay your salary. I can't accept this." "I'm not asking for a salary," she said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "I have my savings. I can stay here taking care of the house until you get back on your feet." "But that's impossible, Margaret. She knelt before him, taking his hands in hers. The rough texture of her working hands contrasted with the softness of Richard's, but in that moment they fit together perfectly. "Please let me help. Don't send me away now." Richard looked at this 53-year-old woman who had become so much more than an employee over the years. Margaret had brown hair always tied in an impeccable bun, green eyes that conveyed serenity, and a smile that brightened the most difficult days in the mansion. "I can't accept this from you," he murmured, moved. "It's already decided," she replied, standing up. "I'll have Jennifer sleep at her sister's house, and I'll stay here to take care of you." Jennifer was her 25-year-old daughter, a law graduate who also worked part-time helping with the house paperwork. A smart and determined young woman Margaret had raised alone after her husband abandoned them years ago. That afternoon, Margaret watched the other employees say their goodbyes. Betty, Frank the gardener, Charles the driver, all left with teary eyes, taking with them years of shared history. When the house became empty, only she and Richard remained in the hallways that now echoed with every step. The first week was the hardest. Richard barely left his room, spending hours on the phone trying to resolve the company's situation. Margaret improvised a kitchen in one of the maids' rooms, using a hot plate she managed to borrow from a neighbor. Simple meals were served on a plastic table, very different from the splendor of previous meals. "Margaret, you don't need to do this," Richard said one of those nights, while she served simple pasta with tomato sauce. "Yes, I do," she replied, sitting at the table with him for the first time in 15 years. "We're family now." The word family hung in the air between them, loaded with meanings neither dared to explore at that moment. It was in the second week that the lawyer appeared. Dr. Edward Pierce was a thin, bespectacled man, always very elegant, whom Margaret knew from his occasional visits to the house. This time, however, there was something different in his demeanor. "Richard, I need you to sign these documents urgently," he said, spreading papers over the dining room table. Margaret was serving coffee when she noticed the lawyer's haste in explaining the terms. Something in her feminine intuition alerted her to pay attention to the conversation. "Are these the papers for the house sale?" asked Richard. "Yes, but also some adjustments to the investments. You need to sign today so we can get a better buyer." Margaret approached discreetly, pretending to clean the table. Her eyes quickly scanned the papers, and something intrigued her. There were several clauses in small print that seemed to transfer more than just the property of the house. "Dr. Pierce," she said, interrupting the conversation, "could you explain this paragraph here?" The lawyer looked at her with irritation. "Margaret, with all due respect, this isn't a matter for—" "Let her speak," Richard interjected. "Margaret has a good head for numbers." She pointed to a clause that also transferred the rights to patents the company had developed over the years. "Why are the patents included in the house sale?" The lawyer's face flushed slightly. "They're just legal formalities. Richard, we really need to speed this up." Richard took the papers from the lawyer's hands and examined them more closely. "Margaret is right. Why would my sustainable construction patents be tied to the house sale?" The lawyer began to stammer technical explanations, but Richard had already lost trust. "I'll take these papers to another lawyer to review," he finally said. "Richard, we don't have time for this. The buyer might back out." "Then let him back out," Margaret said firmly. "Better to lose a questionable sale than to sign something we don't fully understand." After the lawyer left, visibly irritated, Richard looked at Margaret with admiration. "How did you notice that?" 15 years taking care of this house taught me to pay attention to details," she replied, "and something told me that man was in too much of a hurry." It was that same evening that Margaret found Richard in the garden, sitting on the bench near the fountain that no longer worked. The tears on his face glistened under the moonlight. "I've lost everything, Margaret," he confessed. "The company, Brittany, my reputation, and now I find out even my lawyer might be cheating me." She sat beside him on the bench, feeling the cool night breeze of New York. "You haven't lost everything," she said softly. "You still have your intelligence, your honesty, your work ethic, and you have people who believe in you." "Who believes in me? Everyone has abandoned me." Margaret turned to face him directly. "I believe." In that moment, something shifted between them. Richard saw Margaret not just as the dedicated housekeeper, but as the strong, loyal woman who had chosen to stand by him when everyone else left. She saw in him not the powerful businessman, but the vulnerable man who needed support. "Why are you doing this for me?" he asked. Margaret hesitated for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "Because some people are worth fighting for." The next day, the situation took an unexpected turn. Brittany appeared at the door of the house, elegant as always in a red dress that accentuated her beauty. Margaret greeted her at the entrance, immediately noticing the difference in her demeanor. "I want to speak with Richard," said Brittany, without the usual greetings. "He's in the office, I'll call him." "No need, I know where it is." Brittany entered the house as if she still owned it, her heels echoing through the semi-empty halls. Margaret followed discreetly, concerned about the abrupt way the young woman had appeared. In the office, the conversation was tense from the start. "Richard, I came to get the jewelry I left here," said Brittany without preamble. "What jewelry?" he asked, confused. "The diamond earrings, the gold bracelet, the pearl necklace. You gave them to me as gifts, now I want them back." Margaret watched from the doorway as Richard tried to process what was happening. "Brittany, those jewels were gifts. Why would you want to return them?" "Because they don't make sense anymore, do they?" she replied coldly. "Our situation has changed." "Our situation?" "Richard, let's be practical. You're bankrupt. I have my own life to think about. I've met someone who can offer me stability." The words fell like blows in the office's silence. Margaret saw Richard's face contort in pain and felt anger growing within her. "So that's what it was?" asked Richard. "You were only with me for the money?" "Don't be naive," retorted Brittany. "Nobody marries for love these days. Marriage is a partnership, and our partnership no longer makes sense." It was then that Margaret could no longer contain herself. "Excuse me," she said, entering the office. "Miss Brittany, you are in a house that hasn't been sold yet, speaking to a man who dedicated 2 years of his life to you. A little respect wouldn't hurt." Brittany looked at Margaret with contempt. "And who are you to talk to me about respect? A maid who isn't even getting paid?" "I am a woman who knows how to recognize a person's value by their character, not by their bank account," replied Margaret, keeping her voice firm. "Oh, how touching," Brittany mocked. "The little maid defending her little boss." The tension in the air was palpable. Richard stood up from his chair, his face red with anger. "Enough, Brittany. The jewelry is in the safe. You can take everything and never come back here." "With pleasure," she replied, smoothing her red dress. "Oh, and Richard, my new boyfriend is Robert Kingsley. You must know him. He owns Kingsley Developments. He told me he always wanted to meet you in person. Maybe you'll meet soon." The mention of Robert Kingsley's name made Richard's blood run cold. Kingsley was his biggest competitor in the real estate market, known for questionable practices and trying to buy struggling companies for way below market value. After Brittany left with the jewelry, the house became even quieter. Margaret found Richard in the living room, looking out the window at the garden that was slowly showing signs of neglect. "She's right about one thing," he said without turning around. "I am a fool. 2 years thinking she loved me." "You are not a fool," replied Margaret. "You are a good-hearted person who believes in people. That is not a flaw. Believing in people led me to bankruptcy." "It wasn't believing in people that led you to bankruptcy," she said, approaching. "It was trusting the wrong people." Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we are just starting out, now continuing. That night, Margaret called Jennifer and told her about the recent events. "Mom, this is very strange," said her daughter over the phone. "A lawyer trying to include questionable clauses, the ex-fiancé showing up with a competitor, and now this Robert Kingsley in the story." "What are you saying?" "I might be imagining things, but it all seems very connected. Mom, do you have access to the company papers?" "I have some documents that Mr. Richard keeps in the office." "Can you take a look at the recent contracts? Look for anything related to the name Kingsley or Mr. Pierce." Margaret spent the night examining the papers in the office. Her years of experience organizing documents helped her find patterns that might have gone unnoticed by others. And that's how she discovered something disturbing. There were several purchase offers for land that the company had rejected in recent months, all from different companies, but with the same legal representative, Mr. Edward Pierce. And all these companies, when Margaret researched the papers, were subsidiaries of Kingsley Developments. The next morning, she presented her findings to Richard. "Does this mean Mr. Pierce was working for my competitor all along?" he asked, incredulous. "It seems so. And if he had gotten you to sign those papers yesterday, the patents would have gone straight into Kingsley's hands. Richard began to put the pieces of the puzzle together. The company's financial problems had started right after some important clients cancelled contracts at the last minute. Clients who, he now realized, had been influenced by insider information that only his lawyer could have provided. "Margaret, you may have just saved what's left of my company," he said, emotional. "It's not over yet," she replied. "You need a new trusted lawyer to review all the contracts from the past few years." It was Jennifer who recommended Mr. Harold Williamson, an older, experienced lawyer who had been her professor in law school. He agreed to review the case even knowing Richard didn't have much money to pay fees immediately. Meanwhile, the situation at home grew more complicated. With no money to pay basic bills, the electricity was cut off. Margaret and Richard began living by candlelight, like in a romance novel from last century. "This is surreal," said Richard one evening as they dined by candlelight in the makeshift kitchen. "A month ago, I had a multi-million-dollar company, a luxurious home, a beautiful fiancée. Now I'm here eating instant noodles by candlelight with my former housekeeper." "And how does that make you feel?" asked Margaret. Richard thought for a moment before answering. "Strangely, at peace." "Why strangely?" "Because for the first time in years I don't have to pretend to be something I'm not. I don't need to impress anyone. I don't need to keep up appearances. I can just be myself." Margaret smiled in the dim light. "And who is that yourself, Richard?" It was the first time she had called him by his first name without Mr. in front, and they both noticed the change. "I don't know anymore," he confessed. "I spent so much time being the successful businessman, the perfect fiancé, the son who continued his father's legacy. I forgot who I really am." "I know who you are," said Margaret softly. "You do? Tell me." "You're the man who pays for an employee's surgery without her asking, who treats everyone with respect, regardless of social position, who would rather lose money than do dishonest business, who stays up all night when any employee has personal problems." Richard looked at her in surprise. "You paid attention to all that." "I paid attention to you for 15 years, Richard." There was something in how she said those words that made his heart beat faster. For a moment, they looked at each other through the flickering candlelight, as if truly seeing each other for the first time. The moment was interrupted by the ring of Richard's cell phone. It was Charles with news about the investigation into the contracts. "Richard, you need to come to my office tomorrow," said the lawyer. "I've discovered some things that could completely change your situation." The next morning, Margaret insisted on accompanying Richard to the lawyer's office. Charles was a grey-haired man with thick glasses who received them seriously. "Richard, your situation is more complicated than we thought, but it also has aspects that could be favourable," he began. "Mr. Pierce was indeed passing insider information to Kingsley Developments. I have proof of this." He showed a series of emails and documents he had obtained through contacts in the legal field. "Furthermore, I discovered that several of your company's financial problems were artificially created. Clients were influenced to cancel contracts. Suppliers received false information about the company's situation, and there was even sabotage at some construction sites." Margaret held Richard's hand upon hearing these revelations. "Does this mean I can sue Mr. Pierce and Kingsley?" asked Richard. "Not only can you, but you should. But there's a problem. They know you've found out. I've received information that they're preparing an offer to buy your company for a pittance, claiming you have no choice." "Do I have one?" Charles smiled for the first time during the meeting. "This is where things get interesting. The patents they tried to steal are worth much more than we imagined. Your sustainable construction technology is being sought by European companies. I have a contact who can mediate the sale of these patents for an amount that would save your company." Richard and Margaret looked at each other, hope shining in their eyes for the first time in weeks. "How much time do we need?" asked Margaret. "A few weeks to organize everything." "The problem is that you all need to hold on until then without Kingsley discovering our plans." They returned home with a mixture of hope and apprehension. The coming weeks would be crucial, and they would have to keep pretending they knew nothing while secretly organizing the counterattack. That night, there was a storm like New York hadn't seen in a long time. With the power out and the candles flickering in the draught, the mansion felt like a haunted house. It was during this storm that Richard began to feel unwell. "Margaret," he called weakly from the bedroom. She rushed to find him pale and sweating. "I think it's the stress of all this," he murmured. Margaret improvised cold compresses and cared for him through the night. No doctor, no power, just her and her years of experience caring for her own sick mother. "You don't have to do this," he said in the early hours. "Of course I do," she replied, changing the compresses. "It's what we do for the people we love." The word love hung in the air between them. Richard opened his eyes and looked at her intently. "Margaret? Sleep now. We'll talk tomorrow." But he held her hand. "Margaret, I need to tell you something." "Go ahead." "These past few days, seeing how you've cared for me, how you stayed by my side when everyone abandoned me, I started to realize that maybe I've spent 15 years looking at the wrong person." Margaret's heart raced. "Richard, you're delirious from the fever." "I'm not delirious. I'm seeing clearly for the first time. Brittany never truly loved me, never truly knew me. But you—" He squeezed her hand. "You know every detail of my life. You know how I like my coffee. You know my schedule. You notice when I'm worried before I even realize it. And more than that, you accept me for who I am." Tears began to stream down Margaret's face. "Richard, you're confusing gratitude with—" "I'm not confusing anything," he interrupted. "Margaret, I think I've fallen in love with you." She gently withdrew her hand. "You're going through a difficult time. When everything is resolved, you'll see that—" "When everything is resolved, I hope I have the courage to repeat what I just said," he said, "and I hope you'll give me a chance to prove it's not just gratitude." Margaret spent the rest of the night awake, her heart in turmoil. At 53, after so many years dedicated to work and her daughter, she had never imagined she could experience a great love, and even less that it would be with the boss she had worked for 15 years. The next morning, Richard was better, but still weak. Margaret insisted he stay in bed while she prepared breakfast. That's when she heard the doorbell ring. At the door stood an elegant man, about 50 years old, who introduced himself as Robert Kingsley. "I need to speak with Richard Harrison," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "He can't receive visitors right now," Margaret replied politely. "I think he can. Tell him I've brought a proposal that will solve all his problems." Margaret felt a chill in her stomach. She knew this moment would come, but she didn't expect it so soon. "I'll see if he's up to it," she said, closing the door. Richard, even though still weak, insisted on receiving Kingsley. Margaret served coffee in the living room and stayed nearby, pretending to tidy the few things left in the house. "Richard, my friend," Kingsley began with false cordiality, "I heard about your difficulties and came to offer a solution." "What kind of solution?" "I'll buy your company today. I'll pay the debts, you'll be free to start over, no headaches. And what are you offering?" Kingsley mentioned a figure that was about 10% of what the company was really worth. Margaret saw Richard control his breathing to not show his indignation. "It's an interesting offer," said Richard calmly. "May I have a few days to think about it?" "Unfortunately, the offer is for today. Tomorrow I may no longer be interested." "Why the rush?" "Business, my friend. You know how it is." Richard looked at Margaret, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. "I'll need to discuss this with my lawyer," said Richard. "Mr. Pierce. He already knows everything. In fact, he was the one who suggested I make this proposal." The mask was slipping. Kingsley no longer bothered to hide that he had Mr. Pierce on his side. "I'm changing lawyers this week," said Richard. "I'll need the new one to review the proposal." Kingsley's smile disappeared. "Richard, don't be stubborn. You have no alternative. The company is bankrupt. You're going to lose everything anyway. At least this way you walk away with some money." "Thank you for coming," said Richard, standing up. "Margaret, would you please escort Mr. Kingsley to the door?" Kingsley stood up, visibly irritated. "You're making a mistake, Richard. 1 week maximum. After that, the offer drops by half." After he left, Richard collapsed into his armchair, exhausted. "He knows everything," said Margaret. "The rush, the threat, the certainty that you have no options. They really planned all this." But they don't know that we know too, replied Richard. Mr. Harold said he needs 2 more weeks. We'll manage to hold on. The following 2 weeks were the most tense of their lives. Margaret developed a routine of leaving early to do shopping with her own money, always watching to see if she was being followed. Richard stayed home, organizing documents and preparing for the legal battle to come. It was during this period that Margaret noticed subtle changes in Richard. He watched her differently, smiled when she entered the room, looked for excuses for conversations that stretched beyond necessary. And she, who had always suppressed any feelings that weren't professional, began to let her heart open. One evening, while they dined by candlelight, the electricity was still cut off, Richard returned to the subject that had been left hanging on the night of his fever. "Margaret, have you thought about what we discussed when I was sick?" She set her fork down on her plate. "I have. And I'm afraid." "Afraid of what?" "Afraid of taking advantage of your moment of weakness. Afraid that when everything is resolved, you'll realize it was just gratitude. Afraid people will say a housekeeper took advantage of her employer's situation." Richard leaned across the table and took her hands. "Margaret, look at me." She raised her green eyes to meet his brown ones. "Do you really think you're the kind of person who would take advantage of someone?" "No, but... And do you think I'm the kind of man who would confuse gratitude with love?" "You spent 2 years thinking you loved Brittany." "That's true," he admitted. "But what I felt for Brittany was admiration for her beauty, fascination with her youth, pride at being with someone everyone envied. With you, it's different." "How is it different?" "With you, I feel peace. I feel I can be myself without fear of judgment. I feel I have a true partner, someone who knows and accepts me with all my flaws and qualities, and when you smile, my heart races in a way that never happened with Brittany." Margaret felt tears in her eyes. "Richard, I have feelings for you too. For years, actually. But I always knew my place in this house." "Your place in this house has always been by my side," he said. "I was just too foolish to see it." They stood up at the same time, and for the first time they kissed. A tender kiss, full of years of suppressed feelings and hopes for a future together. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. This really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. The next day, Mr. Charles called with good news. The European company had agreed to buy the patents for an amount even higher than initially estimated. Furthermore, they wanted to hire Richard as a consultant to implement the technology in the United States, which would guarantee a fixed income for years. "But there's more," said the lawyer. "I've obtained definitive proof that Mr. Pierce and Kingsley set up a scheme to bring down your company. We can sue both of them and demand compensation for moral and material damages." Richard and Margaret embraced, emotional. Finally, the light at the end of the tunnel was becoming a reality. "When can we publicly announce that we've uncovered the scheme?" asked Margaret. "Tomorrow. I've already prepared all the documents to file the lawsuits." That night, they celebrated with a bottle of wine that Margaret had saved for a special occasion. The electricity was still cut off, but the candles created a romantic atmosphere in the living room of the semi-empty mansion. "Margaret, can I ask you something?" said Richard after his second glass of wine. "You may. When all this is over, when I manage to rebuild the company and pay off all the debts, would you marry me?" Margaret almost dropped her glass. "Richard, are you sure about what you're saying?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life. You've proven to be the most loyal, courageous, and loving woman I've ever known. I want to spend the rest of my life returning all the love you've shown me." "And what will people say? A businessman marrying his former housekeeper? The people who truly matter will be happy for us. The others, well, they were never really our friends anyway." Margaret stood up and walked to the window, looking at the garden in the moonlight. "Are you sure it's not just the moment, the gratitude, the loneliness?" Richard approached from behind and hugged her. "Margaret, I may have lost my company, my home, my reputation, but I found something far more valuable. I found you. I found true love." She turned in his arms. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, what?" "Yes, I will marry you." They kissed again, this time with the certainty that they were building a future together. The next morning, Mr. Charles set the entire legal plan in motion. The lawsuits against Mr. Pierce and Robert Kingsley were filed, and the specialized press began to spread the story of the scheme to bring down Harrison and Associates. The reaction was immediate. Clients who had cancelled contracts called to apologize and wanted to resume business. Suppliers offered special terms to help with the recovery. Public opinion turned against Kingsley, who already had a questionable reputation in the market. But the most unexpected twist came 3 days later, when Brittany showed up again at the house door. This time, she wasn't as elegant as always. Her blonde hair was disheveled, her makeup was smudged, and she was wearing simple clothes. "Richard, I need to talk to you," she said when Margaret opened the door. "You have nothing more to say here," Margaret replied coldly. "Please, Margaret, it's important." Richard appeared behind Margaret and gestured for her to let Brittany in. In the living room, Brittany seemed like a completely different person from the confident woman who had left weeks before. "Richard, I made a terrible mistake," she began. "What mistake, Brittany?" "Robert Kingsley deceived me. He didn't really want a relationship with me. He only wanted information about you and your company." Richard and Margaret exchanged glances. "What kind of information?" "Everything. Your habits, your weaknesses, your friends, your lawyers. He said it was to protect his business, but now I realize it was to harm you. And why are you telling me this now?" Brittany began to cry. "Because he used me and discarded me. As soon as he found out what he wanted, he sent me away, said I was nothing but a useful tool." Margaret felt a mix of pity and indignation. On one hand, Brittany had betrayed Richard at the most difficult moment of his life. On the other, she had also been a victim of Kingsley's manipulation. "Brittany, why did you really come here?" asked Margaret. "Because I want to help you bring down Robert Kingsley. I have proof of everything he did." Richard leaned forward in his chair. "What kind of proof?" "Recordings of conversations, emails, documents. Robert is very confident. He never imagined I could turn against him." Dr. Charles was immediately called to evaluate the evidence Brittany had brought. The material was devastating for Kingsley, including recordings where he admitted to sabotaging competitors' construction projects and bribing inspectors. "With this evidence, we can not only win the lawsuits, but also have Kingsley criminally investigated," said the lawyer. Brittany spent the rest of the afternoon giving her statement and handing over all the material she had managed to gather. Before leaving, she asked to speak privately with Richard and Margaret. "Richard, I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness. I was selfish, insensitive, and self-serving. But I want you to know that at some moments, I really thought I loved you." "Thank you for coming, Brittany," replied Richard. "And thank you for helping expose Kingsley." She looked at Margaret. "Margaret, you are a very lucky woman. Richard is truly a good man. Take good care of him." "You can be sure of that," replied Margaret. After Brittany left, Margaret and Richard sat in silence for a few minutes, processing everything that had happened. "Do you still feel anything for her?" asked Margaret. "I feel pity," replied Richard honestly. "Pity because she let herself be carried away by greed and lost the chance to know what real love is. And do you know what real love is? I learned from you." The following weeks brought a series of victories. The sale of the patents to the European company was completed, providing enough money to pay all the debts and still rebuild the company. The international consulting contract ensured financial stability for years. Dr. Pierce was disbarred from the Bar Association and sued for illicit enrichment. Robert Kingsley saw his company investigated, and several construction projects halted due to irregularities. The court ordered him to pay $1 million compensation to Richard. With the financial situation resolved, Richard was able to rehire all the former staff of the mansion. Betty returned to the kitchen, Frank to the garden, Charles to driving. But the dynamic had completely changed. "Mrs. Margaret," said Betty one day while they were preparing lunch together, "may I ask a question?" "Of course, Betty." "Are you really going to marry Dr. Richard?" Margaret smiled. "Yes, I am." "And will you continue to take care of the house?" "I'll take care of the house, my husband, and I'll also help him with the new company. He wants me to be his partner." Betty hugged her emotionally. "You deserve all the happiness in the world. I've never seen anyone so loyal and brave." The wedding ceremony was scheduled for a spring Saturday in the garden of the mansion that had been the stage for so many changes in their lives. Margaret insisted on a simple celebration, but Richard wanted it to be special. "It's my first real marriage," he said during the preparations. "The first for love." "It's also my first," replied Margaret. "Technically my second, but the first doesn't count. I was too young and for the wrong reasons." Margaret's daughter, Jennifer, was radiant about her mother's union. She had become not just a daughter-in-law, but one of the lawyers at Richard's new company. "Mother, can I tell you something?" said Jennifer on the eve of the wedding. "Of course, my dear." "I always knew you were in love with him." "You did?" "Mother, you were different when you talked about him. Your eyes had a special sparkle. I just didn't understand why you never did anything about it." "Because it wasn't my place," answered Margaret. "Yes, it was. Love doesn't know social classes, Mother, and you two are perfect for each other." On the wedding day, Margaret looked beautiful in a simple yet elegant white dress, with fresh flowers from the garden in her hair. Richard waited for her at the makeshift altar near the fountain, which now worked perfectly. The priest, an old friend of Margaret's family, conducted a moving ceremony. When it came time for the vows, Richard held Margaret's hands and spoke from the heart. "Margaret, you taught me that true love isn't about having, it's about giving. You gave me your loyalty when I lost everything, your courage when I was afraid, your care when I was sick, your strength when I was weak. Today I promise I will dedicate the rest of my life to loving you with the same intensity you have loved me." Margaret, with tears in her eyes, replied, "Richard, for 15 years I took care of your house, but you are the one who took care of my heart without even knowing it. You always treated me with respect and dignity, gave me opportunities to grow and saved my family when we needed it most. Today I promise I will continue to take care of you, not as an employer, but as the love of my life." When the priest declared them husband and wife, the whole party burst into applause. Betty cried with emotion in the kitchen, Frank smiled proudly in the garden, and even Charles discreetly wiped away a tear. During the party, Margaret and Richard danced their first waltz as a married couple. In the middle of the song, he whispered in her ear, "Thank you for staying." "Thank you for letting me stay," she replied. Months passed since the wedding, and the couple's life continued in a harmony that seemed like a dream. The company had become one of the most respected in the country in sustainable construction. Margaret, now an official partner, discovered a natural talent for administration that surprised even herself. One day, while organizing papers at the company office, Richard found a sealed envelope in an old drawer. "What's this?" asked Margaret. He opened the envelope and found a letter in his late father's handwriting. "It's a letter my father left for me," he said, moved, "to be opened when I found true love." Margaret moved closer as he read the letter aloud. "My dear son, if you are reading this letter, it means you have finally found someone who loves you for who you are, not for what you have. I always knew this day would come, and I always imagined it would be someone very special, someone who was already part of our family in some way. Take good care of this love, because it is the greatest treasure a man can have. Your mother and I bless you from wherever we are." Margaret began to cry upon hearing Richard's father's prophetic words. "It's as if he knew," she said. "Maybe he did," replied Richard, hugging her. "He was always a wise man." 6 months after the wedding, Margaret discovered she was pregnant. At 54, she had never imagined she could have another child. The news worried and delighted the couple at the same time. "Are you sure you want to have this baby?" asked Richard, worried about the risks of a late pregnancy. "I'm sure," replied Margaret. "This baby is proof that love can create miracles at any age." The pregnancy went smoothly, closely monitored by the best doctors Richard could afford. Jennifer was thrilled at the prospect of having a younger brother or sister. "Mum, you're going to be an older mother than many grandmothers," she joked. "And I'll be the happiest mother in the world," replied Margaret. When the baby was born, a girl named Hope, the family was complete. Richard held his newborn daughter with tears in his eyes. "Margaret, you've given me everything a man could want. Love, companionship, a true family. You've given me everything too," she answered. "You gave me the chance to know real love. Years passed, and the story of Margaret and Richard became almost a legend in the region. People told the story of the housekeeper who saved her boss and discovered true love. The company grew and became a national reference in sustainable construction. Margaret developed a social project that offered vocational courses for housekeepers, giving them opportunities for professional growth. "Why do you do this?" asked a reporter during an interview about the social project. "Because I was once a housekeeper who depended only on the kindness of my employers," answered Margaret. "I want other women to have opportunities to grow professionally and achieve their independence." Jennifer married and gave Margaret 2 grandchildren. Hope grew up in a house full of love, learning from an early age that people should be judged by their character, not by their social status. Robert Kingsley never recovered from the scandal. His company went bankrupt, and he spent years facing lawsuits in court. Dr. Pierce had to sell everything he owned to pay the compensation and was never able to work as a lawyer again. Brittany rebuilt her life with a simple man who truly loved her. Eventually, she sincerely apologized to Margaret and Richard, and sometimes visited them with her husband and children. One Sunday afternoon, 10 years after the wedding, Margaret and Richard were in the mansion's garden, watching Hope play with her cousins. The house had been completely restored, but they had kept the bench near the fountain, where they had their first honest conversation. "Do you regret anything?" asked Richard. "I regret taking 15 years to discover that you loved me too," answered Margaret, laughing. "And I regret being blind for so long," he said. "But maybe we needed to go through all that to appreciate what we have now." "Maybe so. Happiness earned through struggle has a special flavor." They looked at each other with the same love as their first candlelit kiss, proving that some loves are eternal and grow stronger with time. Hope ran up to them, interrupting the romantic moment. "Mommy, Daddy, can you tell me the story of how you fell in love again?" Margaret and Richard smiled. It was the girl's favorite story, which she never tired of hearing. "Once upon a time there was a housekeeper and a businessman," began Margaret as always. "Who didn't know they were meant for each other," continued Richard. "Until one day life tested them," said Margaret. "And they discovered that true love can overcome any obstacle," finished Richard. Hope clapped happily and ran back to play. "The most beautiful part of the story is that it's real," said Margaret. "And it's not over yet," answered Richard, kissing her gently. The sun was setting behind the garden trees, painting the sky gold. In the mansion that had been the stage for so many emotions, a family built on true love enjoyed their well-deserved peace. Margaret looked around, the flower-filled garden, the house full of life, her husband by her side, her daughter playing, and felt immense gratitude for all the choices she had made. The decision to stand by Richard during difficult times had changed both their lives forever. "You know what's funny?" she said. "What?" "For 15 years I took care of this house thinking it belonged to you. Now I've discovered it was always ours." Richard held her hand, intertwining their fingers as they had done so many times during difficult moments. "Just like our love has always existed," he said. "We just needed the courage to recognize it." As the first stars began to appear in the sky, Margaret Wilson Harrison, who had once been just the housekeeper, knew she had found her true family, and that sometimes life's greatest treasures are right in front of us, waiting for the right moment to be discovered. Love had overcome all social barriers, all lies, all difficulties, and now it shone eternal in the heart of that family that proved the purest feelings are born from dedication, care, and true loyalty. In the house that had witnessed tears and smiles, losses and triumphs, betrayals and true love, the story continued to be written every day. A love story that began with a faithful housekeeper and a struggling employer, but that became proof that destiny always finds a way to unite two souls that were made for each other. End of story. Now tell me what you thought of this touching story about Margaret and Richard. Do you believe true love can overcome social differences? Leave your opinion in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other moving stories like this one.